breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast with Lizzie Green and Joe Crowley. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Justice Matters Pod for clips. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of sexual abuse of children and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Lizzie.
Hello, Joe.
How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I am well. I now have had to wait a week to find out about the Menendez brothers.
I really left you with a cliffhanger.
Massive cliffhanger. They're in their mid-50s. They are convicted. They're in jail, never to be released for the murder of their parents.
The brutal murder.
Brutal murder. Shotgun murder. Shot their mother 6 times?
I think she was 9.
9 times. Shot the father 6 times.
Yes.
Made it would have with shotguns, and everybody who regular listeners know my interest in ballistics evidence, and that would have caused a huge mess.
Disgusting.
And so this is, do you want me to just do a quick little recap for those who have missed last week's episode?
Well, yes, let's see how well you listened.
Okay, yeah, all right, you can give me a mark out of 10. All right, so this is in 1989, and the Menendez brothers are son of Jose, who's a very wealthy movie executive.
Music producer, maybe?
Music, some kind of Hollywood thing. They live in Beverly Hills.
Yes.
And their mother, Kitty, is, she's not the best mother. Can we say that? Was that sort of accepted?
I think so.
Okay, not a great mother. Exactly how bad of a mother she is open to interpretation. And Jose, certainly the boys complain that Jose is a horrible father.
Yes.
They say sexual abuse.
Although I should also I didn't note this last week, but they were very conflicted because there were also recordings of them saying that they loved him as well.
Okay, so are these, one of the main evidence, so you went through some of the evidence that the prosecution gave, and as usual, I was always very skeptical of it, but then you got to the killer evidence, which was that they admitted to it to their psychologist. What was his name again?
Dr. Oziel.
Dr. Oziel, who very interestingly recorded the sessions with them and recorded both of them admitting to it and explaining why, but didn't go to the police.
No.
And it only comes out when Dr. Oziel's mistress,
Judalyn.
First name Judalyn, second name Smith, interesting name.
But with a Y.
Oh, okay. Smythe, I don't know. So she, as a disgruntled ex-mistress, goes and tells the police that the Menendez brothers, patients of her former boyfriend, have confessed to the murder. And the police raid, take the tapes, got the evidence they need, because at that point I think the investigation wasn't going too well for them.
No, they had no real suspects.
No. So then they have, one would have thought, on toast, the Menendez brothers. Mm-hmm. And who were duly then put in jail, and they're on remand waiting for trial for 3 years.
Yes, because of complications with that very evidence of the recorded sessions with the psychologist.
Whether it was admissible, because I think you said there's concerns over doctor-patient confidentiality.
Yes.
And I think I said, in Australia we certainly recognise doctor-patient confidentiality, but it would not, I don't think, be something that would be held up in a case like this.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it made me think, if we go back to the Baden Clay case that we did, I thought there was a whole hearing about records of their marriage counselling sessions under that same privilege.
Really, going in?
Yes.
Or not. But, okay, so the defence is objecting to the use of them on the basis that they're
privileged.
They're certainly confidential, but whether, something can survive the inquiry of a court. Anyway, obviously in the Baden Clay case, Elle went in.
I think it did. Well, I mean, I did read that at one point for an assignment I set, I think. But I know that there was a whole lot of legal argument about that issue.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a given that records will just be admitted without good cause.
No, sure, they've got to pass all of the other evidentiary requirements like relevance, but you can't just try and blacken somebody's character. But these are sort of a different thing again. I mean, if you think about the Baden Clay case, so you've got a husband and wife, they're having discussions with a marriage counsellor that's, I don't know, recorded or there's notes taken, and they want to use those notes in the subsequent trial of the husband for the murder of the wife.
Yes.
That's slightly different from what we have in the Menendez case, which is an absolute confession to the killings.
Yes, it is. But I mean, equally as, or potentially as damning, because Baden Clay wanted people to believe that the marriage was fine, that there was no issue, and he'd been having the affair, and he pretended for so long for the police and the media that he was a grieving husband when he had murdered her and disposed of the body. So evidence that the marriage was in trouble would have been a huge factor for the jury to consider in terms of believing him.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, let's not get too sidetracked by Baden Clay.
If people are interested in our views on Baden Clay, they can listen to the episode we recorded on it.
Yes, absolutely.
Which I think has been reasonably popular. Certainly I've had some good feedback on it.
Well, it is terribly sad, but also very interesting. Yes.
So the boys, or these young men, they admit to it to the psychologist. Is he a psychologist? Psychiatrist?
I think psychologist.
Okay. And
Toziel, if he was more qualified.
More qualified, yes. And then the police then have it. It's then admissible. They run a trial, and the boys' defence is that the father was sexually abusing them and had been for years, and that. Certainly the older brother said he'd been sexually abused for years, and the motive for the murder comes when the older brother finds out that the younger brother has also been sexually abused.
That's right.
This is what the defence argue.
And they confront Jose.
Confront the father on their version. He threatens them. They then produce a shotgun.
Because they say he was so worried that people would find out what the family was like. Yes.
I see. So they sort of give a preemptive self-defense argument.
Yes.
The prosecution's case is that they just killed their parents for the money.
Because I think it was like $15 million plus a $5 million life insurance policy.
Okay.
Which is a lot of money.
Back in
1989.
35 years ago.
I wouldn't say no to it now.
No, absolutely. I wouldn't either. So they run this argument in front of two juries because although it's one trial, there's two different juries, one for the younger brother, one for the older brother.
Yes.
Both of those juries can't agree.
No.
I was very... I said that the prosecution had done a very bad job in that case. Since they had a confession, talk about fumbling the ball over the trial line. Two juries wouldn't accept it.
I do feel a little flicker of loyalty to prosecutors everywhere when you say things like that.
Okay. Because
you can't always predict how a jury is going to decide. You might have done a very good job and still a jury will say not guilty. But yes, I think there were some issues with the running of that trial.
Yes.
Yes.
But interestingly, you gave some information about the jury. One of the jurors spoke about the deliberations.
Yes.
And I took from what you said that the women on the jury believed that the boys had been sexually interfered with and the men on the jury didn't.
Yes, there was this idea that they struggled to accept, the men on the jury struggled to accept that boys could be sexually abused like that.
Yeah.
Which I'm not actually entirely surprised by. I think we've come a long way since the 80s and 90s in terms of understanding and accepting the reality of sexual abuse of all children.
Yep.
So...
yeah, so that was certainly an interesting window into the times.
Yes.
Anyway, so the prosecution run a second trial. They patch up the problems with their first case and rephrase it, reissue it. And with can I just say, a fair bit of help from the trial judge.
Yes.
They managed to get a whole lot of evidence excluded from the second trial.
Yes.
And then they get a whole lot of evidence, restricted in terms of what certain witnesses can say, and they get a conviction. And both the boys go away for life, never to be released.
That's right. I did I didn't say this last week, but there was one thing I read
Yes.
that said that Eric's lawyer, after the second trial,
Eric's the older brother. No, the younger brother. Okay, yep.
said that the judge's rulings essentially acted as a directed verdict.
Wow.
Which, that's a pretty big claim. Like, that's how involved the judge was.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, I mean, when you think about it, the judge really clipped the wings of the defence by reducing so much the defence arguments, which that judge had already heard because that was the same judge as on the first trial.
And I think, look, I know that my opinion is coloured somewhat by the Netflix series, but definitely even through reading the judgments and all the materials that I found, Lyle did come across as the more dynamic and charismatic brother.
Yes.
And he wasn't able to give evidence at that second trial. And so you wonder how much impact that had on the jury.
Yes.
To not get his version and his perspective.
Yes. Very interesting.
Yes.
So, okay. And you said, just so we clarify for everyone, so at the grounds of appeal were all of the complaints that I've just made about the judge not allowing certain evidence in and taking a defence away from the jury, so they weren't able to argue a particular defence, which we talked about last time, to the jury. That was then not the next juries weren't allowed to consider that. Which
is significant because it would have given the jury the option to acquit of murder but convict on manslaughter.
Yeah.
But without that, sort of it's either guilty or not guilty.
Yes.
So.
And then, all of those decisions of the trial judge become grounds of appeal and are then dismissed. So they have a number of appeals which are then unsuccessful.
Yes, they appealed and appealed and appealed, and habeas corpus petitions 1, 2, 3.
3 over a course of how long?
2005.
Yeah.
There was a habeas corpus 99 to the Supreme Court of California.
Yeah.
And then to the United States District Court.
Yeah.
And then to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was between 99 and 2005.
Yeah. So
all denied.
Yes. So habeas corpus was mentioned last time as a writ that you can bring, which is a Latin phrase which means produce the body. And that means that the state or the authority holding the person has to produce them physically in court and then explain to the court on the legal basis for them being imprisoned.
Yes.
So it's it's a de facto appeal.
Yeah, on a different argument.
Yeah. But interestingly, they're obviously jumping between state court and federal courts in the US. So the federal court, they would have to be arguing something constitutional, presumably that their constitutional right to a fair trial or something was not.
It was something about the evidence that was inadmissible. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure, but it was.
Yeah, okay, but you could see how that would be a right. You could make that a rights argument because you could say the evidence should have been admitted and it wasn't. Therefore, their right to a fair trial was infringed.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah. So what I don't think people often fully appreciate is the U.S. Supreme Court, which we hear about all the time in decisions like Roe versus Wade and different appointments to the U.S. Supreme Court. In terms of criminal law, it only has jurisdiction over federal crimes, or if somebody's constitutional rights have been infringed. So it doesn't like our High Court of Australia, which has jurisdiction no matter what state you're convicted in over the criminal law, even if you're convicted of state offences. You can only get to the US Supreme Court or the US federal courts, the lower courts, if you're arguing some kind of rights argument.
I wonder if that's because amongst the 51 states,
yes,
the laws are all so very different.
I think it was. I'm not a scholar of U.S. history, but I think it's more to do with at the time of federation, they were more interested in states' rights than ceding rights to a federal body, and so they wanted to limit the powers of the U.S. Supreme Court just to federal laws and administering the Constitution effectively. So disputes about the Constitution.
So.
Okay, so here we are.
That's where we left it.
And you tempted everybody for this episode by saying you're going to go through the Netflix series and talk about what they got right and what they got wrong.
Well, yes. So because, I think a lot of people would have recently watched
Yes.
this series on
Yes.
Netflix.
If they haven't, they should. Netflix should be sponsoring this episode, really,
They
shouldn't they?
really should.
Yeah.
So let me start by telling you that one day after the show aired on Netflix,
Okay.
Eric from prison slammed the production.
Wow. Okay.
He said, and this is the quote that was tweeted, I think, on Lyle's Twitter.
How does a person in jail have a Twitter account?
I'm not sure.
Okay, that would not happen in Queensland.
Oh, sorry, Lyle's Facebook page.
Again, you wouldn't have a Facebook page if you're in
Okay,
Queensland.
so this is what Eric said. I believed we had moved beyond the lies and ruinous character portrayals of Lyle, creating a caricature of Lyle rooted in horrible and blatant lies rampant in the show. Okay. I can only believe they were done so on purpose. It is with a heavy heart that I say I believe Ryan Murphy, the producer, cannot be this naive and inaccurate about the facts of our lives so as to do this without bad intent.
Interesting.
He went on to say, it is sad for me to know that Netflix's dishonest portrayal of the tragedies surrounding our crime have taken the painful truths several steps backward, back through time to an era when the prosecution built a narrative on a belief system that males were not sexually abused and that males experienced rape trauma differently than women. Those awful lies have been disrupted and exposed by countless brave victims over the last 2 decades who have broken through their personal shame and bravely spoken out. So now Murphy shapes his horrible narrative through vile and appalling character portrayals of Lyle and of me and disheartening slander.
Interesting.
Murphy, for his part, defended how the show offered multiple perspectives. He said, I think it's interesting that he's issued a statement without having seen the show. It's really, really hard, if it's your life, to see your life up on screen. If you watch the show, I would say 60 to 65% of the content centers around the abuse and what they claim happened to them. And we do it very carefully and we give them their day in court and talk openly about it. So attached to that then was an article I read from the 27th of September where the actor who was Cooper Koch, who played Eric in that Netflix series, said publicly that he stands with and supports the brothers in their call for a new trial. He said he visited Eric in prison and called the visit a very rewarding experience. So that's interesting.
It is interesting.
Yes.
Can we just quickly recap some of the things we talked about last episode in terms of that defense? So the brothers, as I said, argue that they were sexually abused by the father and that they were preemptive sort of self-defense, which is a complete defense. If they'd won on that, they would have been free. And then there was this partial defense that you mentioned of
imperfect
self-defense where they would have been only guilty of manslaughter. And I said, I think when you first described that, it's quite a powerful defense. You know, I think that would be quite persuasive on a jury. As you pointed out, the real weakness is that all of their confessions to their earlier psychologists, which were recorded, his name just doesn't stick in my head. Oziel. Dr. Oziel, they never mentioned anything about this in all of those, 17 recorded sessions with him when they discussed what they did and why. Never mentioned the sexual abuse.
It said that the father was horrible.
Yes.
But
didn't, yeah. So that really does, I mean, it doesn't mean that
problematic.
It's problematic.
Yes.
That's right. So
putting it at a kind statement.
Look, you can see a universe in which that it would be true that they were sexually abused and that they just didn't mention it to that psychologist. That's possible. Is it likely?
I mean, I think it's very likely people don't disclose sexual abuse, but if you're disclosing murders and talking about why,
yes,
then it seems incongruous that you wouldn't also disclose.
Yes. Because I have spoken to a man who was convicted of manslaughter for killing his abuser. And we weren't 5 minutes into the conversation and he told me that.
Yeah. And
in great detail. And I didn't actually know it before. I was talking to him in relation to another matter.
But I also want to be very careful here because discussing abuse you have suffered, there is no right or wrong answer there. Like I can't imagine how difficult it must be to talk about and people have very different, reasons for disclosing or not disclosing. And so I think we have to be very careful to say that that's not to say it didn't happen just because someone has not disclosed it at a time they could have.
Yeah.
All right. So what I thought we would go through is what the series got right and what potentially was not quite a correct portrayal, right? Because I think it's interesting to watch the series, but you don't want to just be swept up into accepting that everything is as it portrayed, because it is fictionalized.
Yes.
All right, but so what did they get right? So I told you that the Milli Vanilli song they played at the funeral was correct.
What was the song again?
Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You.
Girl, I'm Gonna,
bit of an odd choice. I did read that apparently Milli Vanilli are experiencing a little bit of a resurgence in
God, I'm Gonna Miss You, or Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You now.
Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You. Even though, weren't they the ones that lip synced everything?
Yeah, I mean, let's not be too hard on them.
So another thing was there was quite a lot in the series about Lyle, the older brother, being bald. He had a toupee, which didn't just sit on his head, but it was kind of like screwed in. And there's one scene where Kitty ripped off the toupee and it would have really hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry, how old is he?
21.
And he's bald.
Well, he had hair on the sides.
Wow.
And so the TV show talked about how he would be ordering these hugely expensive hair pieces while he was in prison.
Yeah.
Because he was obsessed with not having that baldness.
But and they were allowed to keep the money from their parents, were they?
No, this was before that was taken away.
In their 3 years on remand.
I guess so.
Yeah.
So he did, in fact, in real life, start to lose his hair as a teenager. Jose took him to get fitted for the toupee. And it was argued during the trial in real life that Jose's alleged abuse caused him to be so stressed out that the hair loss was a side effect of that.
Wow.
Yes.
Interesting.
Obviously, the confession to the therapist, Oziel, was true. That includes his disclosures to his girlfriend, which then led to the disclosure to the police. So he did, in fact, do all of that. According to the Los Angeles Times, really branched out with my news articles.
Yes.
Dr. Oziel was stripped of his license to practice as a psychologist in 1997.
Really? Because of this case?
Well, an article says Eric and Lyle Menendez's Beverly Hills therapist, who heard them confess to killing their parents and then became a key witness, was stripped of his psychology license. Oziel, who had been accused by a state panel of breaking confidentiality rules and having sex with female patients, surrendered his license to the State Department of Consumer Affairs Board of Psychology. In a deal that was agreed to but became final just on Friday, Oziel admitted no wrongdoing.
Yeah. So he surrenders his license, so there's no public hearing. So he's publicly accused but has never defended himself.
His lawyer told the media that he had moved out of the state, was no longer in the field, saying it just made no sense to come back to California and spend many thousands of dollars defending a license he doesn't use in a state he doesn't reside in.
Okay.
Dr. Oziel later clarified that he didn't give up his license because of the accusations. He said, I had phased out my practice because I had a major business offer that was highly lucrative, and I moved to be the CEO of a large business in another state a year and a half prior to the surrender. No agency ever found I did a thing that was improper or wrong.
Okay.
There you go. Apparently he's now living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and working at the Marital Mediation Center.
Oh, lovely.
Good for him. One last interesting fact. At the time that he started seeing Eric, his license was on probation. Oziel's license was on probation for what the State Board of Psychology considered an improper dual relationship. Apparently he had once exchanged therapy for work being done around his house by a patient.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
A little bit of trouble with maintaining boundaries, perhaps. Yes.
That's interesting. But so Lyle, just to recap, he was going to Dr. Oziel. Eric, the younger brother's going to Dr. Oziel because it was part of the sentence that he got for break and enters in Beverly Hills.
That's right.
And so was that ordered by the court, or could he just choose his own therapist?
I don't know who chose I'm pretty sure Jose chose the therapist,
Okay.
but he was ordered to undertake counselling.
Counselling.
Yes.
Okay. And then after Eric discloses that he has murdered his parents, Lyle then starts to attend and they have these dual sessions, do they?
I think Lyle went to see what Eric was saying.
Right.
Yes.
Bit controlling like his father.
Well, you learn what you learn, don't you?
I know. Jeepers. Okay.
So the trials were pretty much correctly portrayed, although the content of some of the trial evidence we have a problem with. But
Okay.
yes, there were the 2 trials with
Are we
the
gonna go
separate
through
juries.
that?
I'll come to the things they
Nice.
got wrong.
Good.
It was correctly portrayed that there was a connection, as we talked about, between OJ and the brothers.
Okay, yeah.
So, a little brush with fame while in prison was that whole side issue with OJ Simpson.
But you said in the first one that he was actually sort of a friend of the family and had dropped around and he'd known the boys for years because he knew the father, Jose.
That's right. Jose had gotten him a sponsorship deal.
And is he a character in the Netflix series?
No. So he's named. They talk about his trial. But when you see in the series Eric talking to OJ,
yes,
you just hear OJ's voice.
Right.
So there's not even an actor portraying
Wonder
OJ.
why they did it like that.
Maybe they didn't get permission. I don't know.
Okay.
The woman who catfished Lyle, the undercover journalist.
Okay, so
that was true.
All right, we just read a recap. So Lyle is on the phone to a woman who has called him and said that she really believes him and feels sorry. This is while he's on remand.
Yep.
And he then talks to her a lot, including about how he feels he's doing as a witness in his first trial.
Correct.
And that they should write a book together.
Yes.
But the woman is really an undercover journalist who then writes her own book.
Yes, and sells the recordings.
Okay. And do they form any part of the prosecution case in the second trial?
No.
No, okay.
I don't think so. I guess he would have had to give evidence maybe to open the door to that. I don't know.
Oh, because he doesn't give evidence.
That's right.
Oh, yes, interesting.
Yeah. The last scene of the series, which Claudia, my daughter who told me I had to do this episode,
Yes.
said, oh, it was so sad. The last scene was so sad.
Okay.
And that's because after they get sentenced, they each get taken from their cells in the middle of the night and being told that they've been transferred, and they get put onto separate prison vehicles.
Yep.
And they're driving in a line, and then one goes right and one goes left.
Yeah.
And in fact, I don't know if it happened in the middle of the night like that, but that did happen. They were separated and taken to separate facilities and didn't see each other for 22 years.
But, what is the imperative to separate them after they've been convicted?
Well, while they were on the remand, Lyle was coming up with plans apparently to try and escape. But,
22 years separated. I mean,
22
really
years.
Justified by a few, discussions about escaping while
it
on
is
remand.
sad, but I did think...
Well, it's more than sad. I mean, I just think that this is the way that people are treated in jail is a disgrace. And that's indicative of it. What is that? What is the managerial imperative for doing that? There isn't.
Well,
one.
I guess there's some argument that why should they be entitled to family comfort if they're convicted murderers who have...
Because the punishment is that they have their liberty taken away. It is not then some kind of further emotional abuse. They can't go anywhere and do anything.
I know, but other people who've committed an offence are separated from their family as their punishment. So why should these two get to have family time?
I don't know what the first example you gave is. What's that? I mean, who?
Other people who are murdered
yeah.
are separated from their family. They go to prison and their family's not there. So they don't see their family. So why, just because these two committed offences together, do they get the benefit of family time?
Well, you are separated from whoever it is that you love when you go to prison, and
That's right.
They can come and visit you. But why should they? Is it taken if the judge considers that on sentence as part of their punishment?
It wasn't part of the punishment.
No, exactly. So why is the executive arm making a decision like that by just unilaterally going, we're going to increase the punishment by separating them?
I don't actually feel sorry for them.
I do. What bureaucrat makes that decision, and on what basis do they make it?
But why do we feel sad that just because they both got convicted of murder, they get the benefit of family support in prison?
because the punishment is they have their liberty taken away.
All right. Well, we will agree to disagree.
Okay.
I don't think it was that sad.
I think.
I thought,
well, your
whatever.
daughter clearly thought it was sad.
I know.
The
I
prison
haven't
truck
done-
going left and the prison truck going right really tugged at her heartstrings.
I haven't done a good enough job hardening her heart
Okay.
against these offenders.
Okay.
All right. So something I didn't touch on
Yep.
in the other episode, but one of the things that the police were curious about was the fact that apparently prior to all of this happening, Eric and one of his mates had written a screenplay about a man who murders his parents for an inheritance.
Wow.
Yes. Apparently it was called Friends.
Interesting. No,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is obviously prior to the hit series Friends.
And in the series, they made a joke like, who'd ever watch a show called Friends?
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
So they leaned into that a little bit.
Right.
And so that was true. They did write a screenplay, Eric and his mate. But both Lyle and Eric have always denied that money had any part of their motivation for the murders.
Yeah. I mean, as I said to you in the first episode, I think the prosecution's better case was that the parents, Kitty and Jose, were not very good parents and pretty horrible parents, not to the extent of sexual abuse, but just, as you described, horrible and controlling.
Yeah.
And that really is motivation. And I said, I think
maybe it would have been better.
Yeah. Well, I think it would have, because it would have taken the sting out of some of the defence arguments,
true.
I think. And, proof of the pudding's in the eating, because the prosecution fail on their first attempt and get a hung jury.
Yeah. All right. So another thing that was like a side story in the series was this character called Dominic Dunn.
Mm-hmm.
And he was played by Nathan Lane,
Okay.
who voiced Zazu in The Lion King.
Wow.
So that's all I hear.
What
when
a what a claim to fame. I wonder if that's on the first line of his resume.
He was also in a movie with Robin Williams. Oh, anyway, he's a great actor.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he played a bit of a role. He was a journalist for Vanity Fair, and his daughter had been murdered some years before by her ex-boyfriend.
Oh.
And so he was struggling with that because that murderer, John Sweeney, was convicted of manslaughter only and he only served 3.5 years before he was released. And so he was following the trial. He was in court and he was very disbelieving of the abuse excuse, as they called it. So that's because, and this was all true. So this was based in truth. There was a guy called John Sweeney who did kill 22-year-old Dominique Dunn. Dominic the dad, Dominique the daughter.
Okay.
And he was caught immediately. He'd gone to her house after they broke up and he strangled her.
Oh, okay.
And it turns out he must have been strangling her for about 6 minutes.
Oh.
So she was placed into a coma and then she died. But at his trial, he said he hadn't planned to hurt Dominique. He said that he had had a terrible history himself. And so I think Dominic Dunn was very skeptical of this claim that they committed the offence because of what had happened to his daughter. All right.
But sorry, in real life, because you didn't mention him in our first episode, so what role did he watch the trial?
He
wrote
just
about
was a
it, did he?
character.
Okay.
Yes. And so he would pop up making comments on the lack of credibility that Eric and Lyle had and that he didn't believe their story. And he was very critical of Eric's lawyer,
So this is in
Abramson.
real life. He's writing this in his newspaper his column or whatever.
Yes.
And so they then portray him in the Netflix series.
Yes.
And so that's accurate.
Well, that was definitely based in truth. Some of it, I'm going to tell you, was maybe not quite true to real life. So the last thing that they got right was a juror had a heart attack during the deliberations.
Wow.
And had to be replaced. So this was a woman called Leslie Hillings. She later spoke out about the experience in an interview, and she said Lyle was definitely closer to getting the death penalty than Eric.
Wow.
And this is the second trial.
Yeah.
And many jurors made speeches both in favour of Lyle and against him. We discussed the death penalty. So there was always that question, if she hadn't had that heart attack and the alternate came in who the series portrayed as being against the death penalty, not against a conviction, but against the death penalty. Would it have turned out differently for them?
Can I say that's so in Australia, the jury has no role to play in the sentence. All they consider is guilt or innocence. And I just think you can see why it's giving the jury a dual role to decide guilt or innocence and the punishment.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they could quite easily be sidetracked on the punishment without actually properly considering the evidence for guilt or innocence.
Well, and I also think it's a huge responsibility, particularly the death penalty cases, to put that on a jury. Like, to have them make a decision should someone be executed or not. I don't know if that's fair.
Well, the American juries seem to have no problems with it all. They seem to be convicting people left and right and sending them off to the chair.
All right. What did the show get wrong? So the portrayal of abuse. So in real life, Lyle and Eric Menendez claimed that their father had sexually abused them for years, which formed the basis of their defense. And so the Netflix series definitely included that, but the real life validity of the molestation accusations has been a subject of debate, and many people doubt the full extent of the claims. In contrast, this series leaned really heavily into portraying the abuse as the sole motivation for the brothers.
Can we just do a little bit of a recap on that? So 99% of the evidence for the abuse comes only from the testimony of Lyle and Eric about what their father did to them. There's no other evidence. Now, I think you pointed out in the last episode, that's not uncommon in that there's often no other evidence of abuse over years and years and years except the testimony of the victim.
Yeah.
I think you said there was one other little piece.
There was a cousin who had said there had been some disclosure of abuse to him.
And you said the prosecution had sort of
called it the abuse excuse and cast doubt on his credibility.
Yes. So you always shoot the messenger. I think that's always a good tactic for the prosecution. So in the sense that there's no other evidence for it except what they say, that is in some sense, well, it's neither here nor there because sure they could have been making it up, but even if they're not making it up, it's not uncommon for there to be no other evidence.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the real problem is, as I mentioned earlier, that they hadn't disclosed it in the 17 interviews they'd done with their psychologist.
Yes. And so linked to that in the series was this very clear implication of an incestuous relationship between Lyle and Eric.
Okay.
So there was evidence.
Which there's no evidence, is there?
Well, so there was evidence from Lyle that on one occasion he had done to his little brother Eric, so this is when they were like 8 years old, what his father had been doing to him.
Right, okay.
That he'd done it once. But certainly, like, there was a lot of lingering hugs and hands on thighs. And
is this in the Netflix series?
In the Netflix series.
Okay.
So there was definitely a suggestion that they were, sexually close.
Yes.
That more than brothers would be.
Yep.
So they both testified in real court that they had never had a sexual relationship.
Interesting that that's an issue. How was that an issue in the trial? But okay.
Yeah, I don't know. And Dominic Dunn, in real life, never insinuated that there was any incestuous relationship, and that was also implied in the thing. In reality, he expressed doubt that Lyle and Eric were ever even sexually abused and openly praised their acting on the stand. So that was something that was creatively added.
Yeah, okay.
How they killed Jose was incorrectly portrayed.
Oh, right.
So in the show, Eric and Lyle, each of them brandishing their shotguns, enter the living room where their parents are watching TV, and Jose sees them and asks what they're doing, like stands up, asks what they're doing before they shoot him and Kitty. So in reality, the evidence that they could glean from the gunshot wounds and that sort of
ballistics
thing
evidence, yep,
is that he likely didn't see the boys before he was killed.
Because you said that he's shot in the close
head,
range in the head.
at point blank from behind.
From behind. Right.
And that's been actually one of the biggest criticisms of the show, that it didn't stay true to the actual method of the murder.
Interesting.
Apparently Kitty probably did see her sons, and, she was, I think, on the ground, so she possibly tried to flee before she was shot.
So I don't want to dwell on it because it is pretty gruesome, but so did they both have a shotgun?
Yes.
Well, that would explain the multiple shotgun wounds if they're both firing.
But they still had to reload because Kitty hadn't died.
Yeah, okay. So their shotguns don't have a lot of
They must have had
big cartridges,
maybe 6 each.
6
and then
each.
they had to reload.
So 9 plus 6 is
15.
Wow.
This is a maths podcast as well.
Yeah. So just to go back to what we talked about in the first episode. So the boys initially call the police, say their parents have been murdered, and they suggest it's the mafia, and there's some evidence from the ballistics that it might have been a execution style killing because Jose, the father, had been shot in both knees.
Yes.
So by the time of trial, the prosecution are arguing that the shots to the knees are done after death.
Yes.
And as a way to create this idea that it was a mafia killing.
Correct.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes. The last thing that was incorrect was around the alibi.
Yep.
So they were portrayed in the series as committing the offences and then going and trying to get a ticket to the movie Batman.
Okay. I remember that. That was a Tim Burton, Michael Keaton Batman.
But because they were so late, they weren't able to get a ticket.
Okay.
So, then they went to a bar and tried to set up an alibi. Anyway, so they did tell the police in real life that they had gone to tennis and shopping and the movies, but they'd never actually gone to the movies. They hadn't left the house after the murders.
Wow.
It was afterwards that they tried to substantiate their alibi.
Okay.
And in fact, Eric said to ABC News in an interview back in 1996, 12 shots in the middle of Beverly Hills on a Sunday night and no one calls the police. We're waiting at the house and no one shows up. I still can't believe it. We didn't have an alibi. All we did was say we were at the movies.
Wow. So that's a 1996 interview after they've been convicted.
Yes.
That is pretty strange. 12 shots and no one calls the police.
Because they were loud.
Yeah, they would be.
I've never heard a shotgun in real life, but
I have. They're very loud.
It seemed very loud. All right, so they are the things I noted that were correct and incorrect about the Netflix. Like a lot of it was very true to reality, but of course with it wasn't billed as a documentary. Like it's a
it's a
TV show.
Yeah, it's a docudrama or whatever you call them. Okay.
But so now let me just tell you about some recent developments.
Okay, this is real life now,
This is back to real life.
Okay. Oh, sorry, just to finish off.
Yes.
So it's a 2-season series and it's finished now?
No, so the series is called Monsters.
Right.
So they did one crime in season 1. This is season 2 of Monsters.
Yes.
Lyle and Eric Menendez.
And
so now it's done. It's 9 episodes.
Okay.
And, oh my gosh, because I made David watch it with me, my husband, and there was one whole episode that was just Eric detailing the abuse he'd suffered.
Wow.
And it was really full on. Like it was, and David finished, I was like, oh, that one was pretty heavy.
Yeah.
I said, but that's the reality of criminal law, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, true or not, that is a depiction of what people have to deal with. All right, so recent developments.
Okay.
Our favourite,
yes,
Kim Kardashian,
okay, yes.
lawyer extraordinaire.
Oh, is she a lawyer?
Yeah, yeah.
What?
She recently, like in the last couple of years.
Really?
Yes.
Got a law degree?
Got a law degree, passed the bar.
Wow.
Pretty sure.
Okay, there you go.
So I don't know if you remember, but we talked about her in the Gypsy Rose Blanchard episode.
Yes, I recall.
Where they've tried to join forces.
Yes.
So she's now involved in this matter. So just after the Netflix series was released, she went to visit the brothers in prison.
Okay.
In fact, the lawyer, the actor who portrayed Eric went with Kimmy K.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Okay.
And after spending time with them, she has now penned a personal essay advocating for their release from prison or at least a lesser sentence.
Interesting.
But we could all benefit from her insight. I'll tell you what she said. She said, I have spent time with Lyle and Eric. They are not monsters. Because the documentary is called Monsters.
Called Monsters, yeah.
They are kind, intelligent, and honest men. In prison, they both have exemplary disciplinary records. They have earned multiple college degrees, worked as caregivers for elderly incarcerated individuals in hospice, and been mentors in college programs, committed to giving back to others. Bless. She said Lyle and Eric were just 21 and 18, respectively, at the time of the murders. Now, at 56 and 53, they are different people. So physiologically and psychologically, time changes us, and I doubt anyone would claim to be the same person they were at 18. I know I'm not.
Yeah.
She looks very different.
Stop it.
All right. So she goes on to reference a prison warden who said he would be comfortable living next door to the Menendez brothers as neighbours.
Yep.
More importantly, I guess, is that the family members are still supporting Eric and Lyle now. You know, all these years later, they're still in support of him.
Yeah.
And she says the murders weren't excusable, but the conviction and subsequent sentence was not just. The trial and punishment was more befitting a serial killer than two individuals who endured years of sexual abuse by the very people they loved and trusted.
Okay. Can I just unpack that for a
Yes.
second? Okay. So if you assume, so they're convicted, which means that the jury,
Accepts.
the jury discounts the idea that there is sexual abuse, or at least, is there a universe where they can accept that they were sexually abused and still say that they had an intention to kill?
Yes.
Okay. So, and the sentencing judge doesn't know that because we don't know what the jury, on what basis the jury convicted. So if you accept that, so the sentencing judge really should have sentenced on the basis of the best case scenario of the jury's verdict.
I feel fairly confident that that judge did not believe a word of the abuse.
Yeah.
He was very strict. Remember, he was so strict on what was admissible.
Yes.
So I don't think he believed them.
No, but he's got a sentence on the basis of the jury's verdict. So I mean, and so they get never to be released. It's a double murder. They're young men. I reckon that's tough because they're young. I mean, I think they're exactly right.
I think it was because they had that special circumstance of lying in wait, which is that premeditation.
Sure. Okay.
So I think that's why it was open to have, or why it was more accepted to have never to be released. Like that was an option for particular types of murder.
Yeah, I'm not saying it wasn't open. I'm just saying it sounds to be it's at the high end of the range of what you would do. And for particularly young people, I mean, give them 30 years, which they've done. Then they're in their mid-50s, let them out. And, you know, this idea that the prison warden said, I wouldn't mind living next door to them, that assumes that they were sentenced to life in imprisonment, never to be released because they were a danger to the community. My guess is they weren't.
No.
So that the idea that they're a danger to the community isn't why they were sentenced. That's not relevant.
The other thing I should have said, I told you that they were separated.
Yes,
to
for
different
22
prisons,
years.
But then in 2018, they were put back into the same correctional facility.
Yes.
So they were reunited.
Yeah, but that's only to take that argument away from people like Kimmy Kay who come out and say.
I'm just saying. Now, in 2023, there was a docuseries called Menendez and Menudo, Boys Betrayed. So totally different to what we've been talking about.
Okay.
And in that docuseries, a fellow called Roy Rossello alleged that he was drugged and raped when he was a teen by Jose.
Okay. Who's Menudo? Who's the Menudo in that?
Menudo band. Okay. So he was a member of that band. And Jose was the music producer.
Yes,
whatever.
I got it. Okay.
So he's now 54 and he says in a sworn affidavit filed in 2023 that he went to Jose Menendez's home in 1983 or 1984. He would have been between 14 and 15 years old at the time. He says he drank a glass of wine, then felt like he had no control over his body.
Yeah.
Jose took him to a room and raped him. He also states in the affidavit that he was sexually abused by Jose on 2 other occasions, right before and right after a performance at Radio City Music Hall in New York. There was also a newly discovered letter that Eric wrote to that cousin who gave evidence, Andy Kano, that described the alleged sexual abuse that was written months before the murders.
Wow. Okay, that's powerful.
The letter reads in part, I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I'm afraid. He's crazy. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle.
Okay.
So this letter was discovered amongst his personal effects. He has died. He died in 2015.
Sorry, the cousins died?
Yes.
Okay.
And so it had never been seen and was found in his personal effects. Nobody had looked at those effects until that point in time. And so now that letter and that evidence of the band member have formed the basis of another habeas corpus petition.
Yes.
So that was lodged in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Now, both the Menendez brothers got married while they were in prison. I think one of them got married twice.
Wow.
And
okay.
Eric has a daughter who's in her late 20s now, I think, Talia. She's advocating for her father through her social media. She is saying that she's praying the DA or the judge has compassion, not only for what my dad and uncle have endured, but also the fact that all of us family wants them home. Almost 35 years is enough time locked away. They have spent more time incarcerated than alive in the real world. So just in time for this podcast recording,
yes,
the DA released their decision about this new petition. So the Los Angeles County District Attorney, George Gascon, has called for his office to re-examine the convictions of Eric and Lyle Menendez. He said, I want to be very clear. We have not conceded one way or the other. We're not saying that there was anything wrong with the original trial. We have been given evidence. He said he believed that the Menendez brothers had been proven to be responsible for the murders, but the discovery of that new evidence, as well as shifting public perception regarding sexual abuse, warranted a reevaluation of their sentences. We are not ready to say that we either believe or do not believe that information, but we're here to tell you that we have a moral and an ethical obligation to review what is being presented to us and to make a determination based on a resentencing side. So he said that the hearing regarding the case will take place on November 29 to determine the next steps.
November 29. Interesting. So where's the downside for the DEA? Because usually what happens is, as we saw in the case of the Jeffrey Gillum, who killed his brother because his brother killed his parents, and there was a real push to prosecute him for the murder of the parents, as well as the murder of the brother, by the uncle, the brother of the dead father. But in this case, there's no family pushing for them to stay in jail. Is the family all supporting them?
Yeah, they're all supporting.
So where is the push to keep them in jail? Where is the victims who are, crying that these people need to serve more time?
We don't need to have a victim crying.
No.
Someone...
I meant crying in terms of sort of shouting as a sort of metaphor.
Well, they went through the system and they got sentenced. It's not common to say, okay, well, now it's been this long, let's see if we think we should still keep them in prison.
Well, let me say a couple of things about that. One, I'm against the death penalty, but I'm also against life never to be released penalties. And often in those life never to be released, there is an ability to review them at some point, and there absolutely should be for people who are so young.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, it really becomes a burden on the state when somebody becomes so old and senile and you've still got to keep them in prison. In terms of the state, it'd be better to let them out and let their family care for them when they were that old.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I think that I got some real question marks over that trial judge and his sentencing. I'd love to read the sentencing remarks.
Well, I couldn't find those. I could only find the habeas
corpus stuff
decision.
Yeah.
But so their story has not ended.
No.
And if you see photos of them at 53 and 56, they're still youthful. If they did get released, which if it was manslaughter, if the abuse was true,
yes,
then it shouldn't have been more than a manslaughter, I wouldn't have thought,
no.
Whether it's provocation or whatever we want to call it.
Yes.
And so they wouldn't have got more than 35 years.
Oh, God, they would have got a lot less than a manslaughter.
So they've definitely
killing your abuser
served their time for their offending. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But that is the Menendez brothers.
What an interesting case.
Wasn't it? Thank you, Claudia, for the recommendation.
Yeah, high five, Claudia.
Yes,
nice work.
Yes.
And obviously people are going to enjoy the Netflix series if they haven't already.
It is very well done.
I'm wondering if I should go and watch it.
I think you should.
I didn't mention that my wife said we should do an episode on it as well. I think she's watched it.
Yeah, no, it was very good.
I didn't give her a shout out because she's not a regular listener, which is a bit insulting, but anyway.
Come on.
All right, Lizzie. Well, thank you so much for that. That was real tour de force.
That's all right.
And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, Please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.